So we took the Ranchero up to a couple interior shops there in Reno, Sparks area. I got some estimates to do the door panels, the headliner, and a panel behind the seat just to finish off the interior. They were wanting right around $5,000 to do that. The door panels I'm not too worried about. I think that's a pretty basic, straightforward. So we decided to hold off on that, and we're actually going to see how much of this we can do ourselves. At least attempt it. If we don't like the outcome, then we can take it down and have somebody do it. But I think for that much money, it'd be interesting to try to see what we can do for ourselves. The headliner is definitely going to be the biggest challenge, but we're going to give it a go. If you have any suggestions or thoughts on it, definitely let us know. We're not going to do the original design with the wire going across. We're going to try to do a rigid, probably two-tone type headliner. So yeah, if you got any suggestions or comments, just leave it down below. Let us know. Alright, so we're going to get started on the Ranchero. I already drained the coolant out of the radiator the other day, so it should be fairly empty. So we're going to end up pulling the radiator out, cover obviously the fan, shroud assembly. Pull as much off the front here to get to the water pump, and so we can get to that broken bolt. And we'll just inspect everything else while we have it apart. And then we also have to get up here and either figure out a way to test these horns or pull them off and test them, see if we can get them working. Could be an electrical issue or maybe something inside the horn. We'll get started. First we get the radiator out of there, go from there. Alright, so I found another cause of a leak. You can see that. See how the hose clamp is barely clamped. And if you look right below it, you can see that coolant down below it. So that's not coming from the water pump, that's coming from, I thought, thermostat housing. But it looks like this hose, they didn't have it long enough. Made it do quite a bend, which is kind of almost pinching the hose. So I'm gonna have to come up with something better for that. Yeah, I think I'm still gonna pull this off. Thermostat's in there, but just concerned since we got this far, might as well put a new gasket in there. Okay, so I got the water pump off, and there isn't a broken bolt. I'll show you. This is the engine block. I need to get a new gasket for sure. I'm gonna pull this off too, just to make sure. I'm gonna put a new gasket on there. I don't trust them. Thermostat's in there, but I'll replace it. Got this far. Look how dinged up that radiator is for a car that hasn't even been driven. And they did not take any pride in their workmanship. So I still gotta unbolt this. It's gonna be a pain. Unbolt this so I at least get it forward enough to get these bolts out for the horns. I'm gonna test those, and then I'm gonna see if I can raise it up a little bit so there's a little air gap underneath between this cross member down there and the radiator. Right now there is, except for one spot where a weld is actually touching it, so they didn't even make sure of that. But yeah, we got the front tore apart. I ordered thermostat gasket. I think I need another water pump gasket, but I'm not sure. So I'm just gonna double check some schematics because I haven't worked on a Ford 302 in ever. This is my first one, so I'm gonna just double check them. We're gonna do now, kind of get an idea from this angle. Another thing I noticed is there's seems to be two different colors of coolant in this, orange and green. So once we get this all back together, we'll do a good flush, try to get it out. But yeah, that's Ford Ranchero so far. See if I can get a picture back far. Works out pretty good. I got one of my lights. This is actually my dad's light he gave me. Put paper towels on there to keep it from getting scratched. I think I'm gonna work on the horns now and the radiator. See what we can do. On. Go? Yep. Where's Grandpa? Alright. Alright, Grandpa, we're testing the second horn. Ready, Jenna?
Yep.
Your horns work. Okay, so we tested the horns, and so that we know the horns are functioning. So it's got to be either the switch inside, if it's wired up right, or they didn't wire the electrical right. But what we're looking here, this goes to the horn. That one over there goes to the horn. You can see how he wrapped it into the front of this little brace. That's just gonna cut. I mean, there's not much I can do here because I don't have a Parker hose crimper, and this is all crimped hose. I wouldn't be able to get it off to reroute it. But this one, we're gonna disconnect it and see if we can route it underneath and then tuck it up to where it's not getting tension. I think it'll look a lot better. So what do you think, Jenna?
Yes.
She agrees, so we'll work on that. All right, trying to get a early start this morning before I got to go to work later on this afternoon. But give you guys an update. We got the water pump off the Ranchero Thermostat Housing. Looks like they've had that pump off before and then used some extra silicone. There's like 2 or 3 different types of silicone that was on the gasket material. So we just got about all the old gasket material scraped off. I got to finish the water pump. I'm gonna do that first thing this morning, and we'll get new gasket installed for the thermostat housing on both sides of the water pump plate. And here's the replacement hose. This is the thermostat bypass hose for a small block Ford. This is the hose that they had on there. I think this was the majority of the leak, but if you look, it's actually 2 different sizes. They stretched this one out, but sun's reflecting a little too much. Let's see here. You can see how the hose clamp mark imprint was just barely on there. So the hose was cockeyed, and I think it was leaking out the side. So this is supposed to be the right hose. We'll see once we get it all back together. We'll get new gaskets. We'll put some silicone on there just to make sure it seals up nice. Get the water pump on. Get the front of the motor put back together. We still got to put some rubber membrane underneath the radiators because there's aluminum. Part of the aluminum welds on the radiator are in contact with the cross member, I guess, where it sits into on the car. So we don't want any of that rubbing, creating a leak and other issues. So we'll get a rubber membrane underneath there, and we'll put it all back together. Then we'll install the choke cable get that working. And we're going to reattach the old exhaust manifolds for the time being, and then hopefully be able to have the engine running today. Actually, I'll have to go in town and get some antifreeze for it. I don't have regular antifreeze for this vehicle, so we'll get antifreeze probably tomorrow. I got to go in town, take the kids to one of their dentist appointments. Once we get that back, we should be able to fire it off. I do have to get underneath there and check the linkage on the transmission while I'm gonna put it all up on jack stands, and we'll inspect the undercarriage, the brakes, make sure all the bolts, suspension parts are tight. Don't know if anybody's torqued anything down or tightened it up. So we'll make sure that's all squared away and hopefully have this car driving on its own. Let's get started. All right, so I got the gasket service cleaned up on all of them. In thermostat housing, water pump plate, and on the block itself in the Ranchero. I got it all cleaned up. I wiped it all with brake cleaner. All the surfaces that the gasket's going to be touched with the silicone. Also wiped the surface on the engine itself where the thermostat bolts to and the water pump bolts to. So all of them was clean. All it's been cleaned with brake cleaner, so we should have good adhesion with the silicone. And now we're getting ready to put it back together. We'll start with the thermostat. I'll coat the gasket with some silicone sealant, install the thermostat housing, and then do the same thing. We'll install this gasket on the water pump, put the backing plate on. Once it's on, put the other gasket on, and then install the water pump on the Ranchero and get it torqued to specs. All right, so we got the thermostat housing installed with the new gasket and silicone. I got this loose because it looked like it was leaking before, so I took it out, cleaned it with brake cleaner and the threads, and removed the old sealant that they had on there. So we will leave it open until I drain it or fill it probably a little bit, see if it lets some of the air out. I don't know if it will, otherwise we'll just seal it and put some fresh silicone on it and seal it up. So now it's time to start the water pump install. So we got the thermostat housing bolted up and the water pump. All the bolts are tightened up. So now we can start putting everything back onto the cover. Actually, before we do that, I'm gonna look and get them rubber membrane to put underneath the radiator so I have a little bit of room to move it. So let me try to find that rubber membrane and we'll get started. Here's the rubber membrane. I pulled it up to get it underneath that, because I think that's probably most likely where it's going to rub, is right underneath that lower radiator hose connection. It does pull up maybe a 1/16 up off the bottom, but got it going all the way across and wrapped it up a little bit. From what I can tell, when it's installed, there's only one weld that's rubbing, but this will protect it all. So now we bolt the radiator back in, get the cooling shroud on, and then mount the accessories on the front. Okay, we got the radiator remounted, bolted down. We got the electric cooling fan set up, installed. See, there's not a whole lot of clearance there. We got the lower radiator hose attached to the water pump with the hose clamp tight. I have not put the upper radiator hose on yet, just because I think it'll be easier to do that after we get the alternator, air conditioning, and power steering pumps on. And then the serpentine belt, of course. And then we'll hook up the little hoses, I think, go from there. It's coming together. I gotta go to work. So maybe after work, I'll work on it some more. Okay, so we got this short section of hose on. I think it looks a lot better. So they had it attached to this one, but all the research I did, it's supposed to be attached to the upper one, and then your heater return goes in here. So, which makes more sense. So, got it, and then it doesn't have that weird S-bend that it had before. It's fitted all the way on there, nice and flat. Same with down here. I left the hose clamps loose just so you see how much nicer it is. I did have to cut about 1 inch off of this end, and then get it to line up there. Probably just so you have variances based on your intake. A lot of different aftermarket intakes out there, so I'm sure it changes a lot. So, all right, we'll put the hose clamps on and move on to the accessories. All right, so we got the car steering wheel pump mounted, the alternator mounted, and the wires are connected. So now I'll go over to the other side, and we'll install the air conditioning compressor, and then just probably few hoses, we'll be done. All right, so we got the engine pretty much all put together. Everything on the front, all the hoses connected. Exhaust manifolds are on. These are just the factory Ford ones. I'm gonna be replacing, these are the studs that they put in, or bolts. They're all different lengths, so I'm gonna be replacing them once we get the headers. All you got left is the collector flange, so I got to bolt it up on both sides, and then the only thing else is hook up run the choke cable from the inside out here and hook it up. Got my helper over here, Jenna. But yeah, this will be back together. We'll get some coolant in it and give it a run. We got to jack it up and look at transmission linkage, check the condition of that, check the drive line. Make sure everything's ready to go. But we're going to call it a night. Suns went down. Well, that's going to be it for this video. Stay tuned. Next one, we'll get the choke installed. We'll inspect that transmission linkage, figure out what we got to do to that, and do a good inspection of the underside of the car. And hopefully everything works out. We will see if it'll drive under its own power. We're all pretty excited about that moment. So subscribe, and thanks for watching.